Hello, Guy.
Hello, Gary.
Yes, how are you?
Oh, I'm all right. Well, you know how
I know
am.
how you are.
Let's face, we've been in rehearsal together all day. So
we have. It's been very nice, hasn't it? We've been getting our chops back and
it's been fabulous.
Playing loud music together. It's very nice.
Indeed.
So, this week, you know Alan McGee, don't you?
I know Alan. I haven't seen him for a
Alan.
long time. I haven't seen anyone for a long time, have you? You know,
He's our first manager, isn't he?
he's our first. But he's manager, label boss, Svengali. It's
credible A&R man.
Yeah, and scenester, isn't he? He was.
I mean,
it's like swirling eye of the storm.
We're talking about the guy who discovered, Jesus and Mary Chain, My Bloody Valentine, Primal Scream, and of course, Oasis.
Let's get him on.
Welcome to the Rockonteurs.
Okay, guys, I'm ready.
This was great, guys. It's so great to talk to two guys that have done this.
Well, it's a big tune for sure. I actually wrote that originally for Tina Turner.
Of course, I had gone and found Joni Mitchell down in Florida and brought her back.
What people forget about Bowie is that he was such a kind man.
I've listened to a few of them and they've been really good, man. I'm sitting in the back of the car coming into London. They're brilliant.
I know you're musicians, but you've been more professional than a lot of journalists.
Remember me? I'm in a band now. It's called Roxy Music.
You know this thing about the 10,000 hours of experience?
Oh, yeah.
Get good at something. When we recorded Arnold Lane, we'd done about 50 hours.
The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Hello, mate. Nice to see you.
How you doing? I don't think I've ever met you, Gary.
No, I was saying that to Guy today. I don't think we've ever met in all this time. We probably would have had a fight or something, maybe at some stage in the
Having been on a deep dive over your past for the last day, this has been very short notice. I'm actually feeling quite cheated because I got to know you in the sort of mid-late 90s. My recollection is a time with you were kind of rather sedate dinners at the Groucho, and I missed all the fun.
I mean. It was a time, wasn't it? You know what I mean? No, I like loads of your records, Gary. I like Chant.
Oh,
that's right.
Because I think because I always saw Creation and what you guys were doing in the 80s, especially, as being the sort of the antidote to the sort of posh pop that we were making, and there's nothing against that. That was absolutely, totally right to have.
We were Creation came out of a kind of school band, really, and it's just a bit like the way you guys all done it as well. And it was like I was the least talented musically, so I became the manager, and it was like me, Bobby, Andrew, Throb, Beatty. We all went to school with each other. And that was, so the Primal Scream story and the Creation story is intertwined, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was what I saw of you guys was also the Primrose Hill crowd. When my ex-wife Sadie was living in Primrose Hill, and I was always around that way, and just the noise that was generated on that street.
I was sober then. I wasn't the one that was making the noise at that point. You know what I mean? And that's why I knew Guy. We've got a great mutual friend called Nick Wear Clothes. What a brilliant guy. And I signed Nick, and through signing Nick, I sort of became pals with loads of his friends. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
Right.
Well, I wanted to get to that later, actually, because there's a whole thing of like having owned the 90s. You then went on this mad spree of signing the 80s.
I could go on about that.
So Kevin Rowland. It was really weird. It's like, right, let's have the 80s.
I'd love to hear what your thoughts were on that Kevin Rowland record, because I thought it was a good record.
It was a good record. It was somewhat antagonistic. I thought the way it was presented.
Look, you know what? I think you were a kind of perfect couple in many ways, because he's a revolutionary, isn't he? He's a bit of an anarchist in the business, Kevin, and it seemed like a good combination. But maybe you can't have two anarchists in the same room.
You had to go on holiday after a while with dealing with me, Gary, because I was like the nightmare A&R guy. I used to give the bands nervous breakdowns half the time because I was so OCD. And that's what I'm like. I live in my own in London because nobody can live with me, right? And if I took you into that bedroom, there's like 1,000 tracksuits and they're all black or blue. And that's kind of me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you run, don't you? A lot now. Like 15 miles or so.
I decided to lose weight and I lost, I'm still losing it. I've lost 47 pounds in the last year.
Wow. You look really well. You look well.
I follow you on Instagram because what's interesting is the things you see, is that you still, from all the stuff you post, you still have that totally unbridled enthusiasm for rock and roll and and young bands.
Now, Alan, there's so much in your story. I mean, going through the whole Jesus and Mary chain and Primal Scream, and then suddenly discovering this little band called Oasis. We should get going on where you.
Okay, well, let's start with because your first gig, you went to see Thin Lizzy with Bobby Gillespie, right?
No, that was his first gig, Guy.
Oh, okay.
You were school friends, right?
He's my best friend. He still is. I'm seeing him on Saturday night. But I was going to gigs. He had great parents. And I didn't have great parents without being horrible, right? And they didn't care what I did. And I was going to gigs by the time I was 10 or 11. So I saw T-Rex, Bowie, Roxy, Slade, Mud, Gary Glitter, Alvin. I saw everybody. And then he jumped on my bandwagon because he's a bit younger than me and went, can you take me to see Thin Lizzy?
Now, was that the Jailbreak tour?
Yep.
Because that's the first gig I ever saw when I went with my best mate from school, Martin Glover, who you know as Youth.
It's a small world.
We're the same age, so glam rock was such a massive turn on for us, and it set the benchmark, didn't it, really, for how rock and roll theatre should be.
It was amazing. And glam thing, I mean, all I ever did was sign what I loved. And what I loved was glam and punk. And that was it. And then, the obvious things like Bowie, blah, blah, blah. But it was like, you're talking about a guy that reaches for the Lindsay DePaul records. You know what I mean? I am perverse, man. I like the stuff nobody else likes. Do you know what I mean?
Did you always have it was kind of after the whole Acid House thing when it suddenly got cool when everyone was sort of with the whole Balearic beat thing, when everyone was dropping ABBA into stuff and then it became the Guilty Pleasures thing, and now all the doors are open to everything. But were you always like that?
I mean Acid House was good though because I was a stamp collector, really. Do you know what I mean? I was signing bands. I can tell you how I actually did well in the music business. It was a total fluke, really, right? I liked the music and everything like that, but I was in a punk band and we weren't very good. It was me and Innes for the Scream, right? And nobody would manage us and nobody would put our records out, right? And I learned how to do the whole thing, to do my own records. So I learned how to manufacture, master, produce, design the sleeves, manufacture the sleeves, promote them at radio, at press, and get gigs. And at a certain point, I went, I think I'm called a record company. And I started putting other people's records out. What I didn't know that is I had kind of commercial taste and I started signing bands that other people liked. Do you know what I mean?
But that's the thing that I find interesting with it was I wanted to ask about, you kind of answered it, was that it's one thing to be the maverick talent, to be the kind of Andrew Oldham, Chris Stamp, Kit Lambert, spotting talent and having the ideas to do it, which is what you have. Especially when you're all crazy about everything. The actual nuts and bolts of finding the manufacturer and doing catalogue numbers and getting the VAT returns and, the actual mechanics of running a record company,
I learned all that by the time I was 21. I learned by default, because I was doing my own records, how to do the whole thing. There was very few people in 1980, 1981 that knew how to do the whole thing. And I was like 19, 20.
Well, I suppose up in Glasgow, there was that little bit of cottage industry in the music business, like Postcard.
Yeah.
And Orange Juice and the Bluebells. And there was a kind of scene already that was a bit, I'm not quite shoegazy, but you know what I'm saying.
Alan Horn was fantastic. We came slightly behind that. And I'm going to say slightly behind it, Gary, 6 months behind it. But it was brilliant. I mean, I don't think we were ever influenced by Postcard in any musical way, but we were definitely influenced by the fact that you thought if Alan Horn can do it, and this is not slagging him because I like Alan Horn, I must be able to do that. Do you know what I mean? Because he doesn't know anything else that I don't know,
But you were in London, weren't you? So, I mean, the labels you were looking at as well, were 4AD around then?
No. I mean, the label I was looking at, to be honest, there was a band called the Television Personalities.
Yeah.
And they had a label called Wham. I'll be honest with you, this sounds a terrible thing to admit to. I kind of nicked their idea because they were merging punk rock and psychedelia. And I was like, that's a fucking great idea. And, you know, Dan was a utter nihilist and destroyed himself. You know what I mean? He's currently ill, you know what I mean, in a care home. I'm friends with him. I talk to him once a month, you know. But yeah, that's where we started. I loved glam records and I started doing it. But like everything, when you start doing it, you become your own thing. And then I found the Mary Chain and it blew up, you know.
And what was your club? You had your club, didn't you?
That's what I was going to ask.
Sorry.
What was the scene, as it were? No. Because I mean, you know, obviously this is there's the whole of our, you know, we're making records that based around the Beetroot Club in 1981. Yeah. You know, and there was that whole sort of Steve Strange, Philip Salon scene, Hell Club and everything. Where were you guys?
I mean, I'd just come to London, Gary. If we could have got into your clubs, we would have come, right? Do you know what I mean? we were squatting. We came to London and we were squatting. We were doing gigs with the UK subs. Now, this is me and Andrew.
Charlie Harper.
Yeah, and we write songs with Bobby. I tell you a good Charlie Harper story. I went to Public Image about 2 years ago with my son, right? And he loves the UK subs. And this little, like, unicorn walked past, right? And I went, that looks like a granddad version of Charlie Harper. And Dan goes, it fucking is. And it was Charlie Harper. And we were getting selfies with Charlie Harper.
But he was 40 then.
Yeah, he's about 75.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I remember he came to see my first ever band, which was this one playing at the Trafalgar in Shepherd's Bush. And I went up to say, I think you're great. And he just thought I was some kid and he went, yeah, come in the shop, I'll give you half price haircut.
He's a hairdresser. He is.
It was a hairdresser, yeah.
We used to play gigs with him. But when you were doing that, Gary, that's what we were doing. What were we into? We were probably into the Jam. We'd started putting our own records out via rough trade distribution. And we were learning. I was learning anyway. I mean, I think Andrew was learning to be a great songwriter, but I didn't know I was learning it, but I was learning how to, I suppose, run a record company, you know.
And of course, The Creation was a band from the 60s. There was a psychedelic British band, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, and then didn't you then later found out that Robert Stigwood actually had a label called
but that was only when the internet happened. And I put in Creation Records one day and I went, fucking hell, man, I've totally nicked it. It was a label in 1967. I didn't know.
So who was the band that really sort of got you started? Was it Jesus and Mary Chain, or was it Primal Scream? Because no, Primal Scream wasn't for a while, was it?
I mean, I put out 10 or 11 records on Creation, funded by the club, the Living Room, which is a room above a pub.
Where exactly was that? That was North London somewhere.
The Adams Arms. I tell you who owns the building now, that pub. And you'll laugh. David Beckham and I think it's Gordon Ramsay. You know what I mean?
Where is it?
It's Adams Arms, Conway Street.
No. That's just around the corner from me.
Yeah.
That's Guy Ritchie's pub.
Guy Ritchie, sorry. Yeah.
That's where your club was.
Yeah, Toffs is all the same. Yeah. Who knows?
It was the upstairs room above that pub.
That's a restaurant now.
Yeah, well, that's where it started. And that's where I put on the very first gigs of the Jesus and Mary Chain, Primal Scream, the Jasmine Minks. And they were all like the third on the bill in that room.
Wow.
There's a scene in your film about the Jesus and Mary Chain, about how it's your mate from TV Personalities who's just completely out and can't run the desk. Yeah. And so there's all this feedback. Yeah. And so there was just a complete accident, and that becomes their sound.
Well, that's my version of it. I think that's what happened. They would deny that.
He's here to tell the stories, Guy, not you to tell his.
The band, the Jesus and Mary Chain, look, the reason I think my version's correct is I have the demo from before they recorded Upside Down, and it's like Ramones meets Dr. Mix in the remix, but there was no feedback on it. And then Joe, who couldn't mix to save his life, messed the sound up so bad, and we were like, it actually sounds good with the feedback, and it grew out of that.
You're going to have to just pause on this for 2 seconds, Mike. I don't think my kid can get in the door.
Right. Oh, well, actually, I'll tell you something to tell you a story then. Because I always loved Chris Thomas, the legendary Chris Thomas, told me the story, which I always loved, about how he went to see the Jesus and Mary Chain. And he said the bass player had 2 strings on his bass. Yeah. So he went backstage afterwards, said, "Excuse me, you the bass player?" "Aye, what of it?" He goes, "Well, it's about your bass." "What of it?" He goes, "Well, it's got 2 strings." "Aye, what of it?" He said, "Well, why have you got 2 strings on your bass?" He said, "In case one of them breaks."
Well, that's probably true.
Yeah.
What do you think it was about Scotland that was creating this sort of shoegazing dream pop thing that was... What were the influences up there?
I think the real truth is, like me and the Primals, the guys in Primals, we were just obsessed with rock and roll. Do you know what I mean? That's why when you're talking about, oh, I bet you, we hated you or something like that, which we never did, right? We were probably jealous of you. We were probably like, these guys are like, they're on top of the pops. And do you know what I mean? And like, they're having it away. They're on tour. That's probably where we were in love with rock and roll. It was as basic as that we just... I mean, I suppose we had a unique voice in a lot of ways because it was what it was. We were making, it was almost like the less we had, the better it got. Do you know what I mean? And I think that was a lot to do with a lot of that early music that we put out, especially Mary Jane,
And also, do you think there was a thing of having this indie level of, like when you're a label like that, there was this indie world, was your level of ambition sort of shaped by that, like top of the indie charts and a cover of NME rather than top of the pops and,
The
guy,
face.
you know me. I mean, I'm one of the most ambitious motherfuckers out there. Once I had like number one, I wanted a real number one. And then once I got like a lot of cash, I wanted a fucking lot of cash. It was like, it's all been like that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
but you had a particular, style and a taste.
That's the thing. You weren't going to sacrifice. You were still only going to sign bands that you thought were cool. Yeah.
His integrity. Your integrity was important, especially when you're a kid. It is, isn't it? I mean,
I think we succeeded on a lot of levels because we just did not know the rules. Do you know what I mean? It actually worked a lot of the time, in business because we just didn't know how to do it. We just made it work for us, and it kind of became a unique thing,
So what was the first hit, Alan?
Well, the hit bands were Jesus and Mary Chain, then House of Love, then My Bloody Valentine, then Primal Scream. And then we never really started having a lot of hits till about 1990, Gary. But all these other bands, as you said, they all got in the top 40.
But what you've got there is you've got some incredible talented people. I mean, Kevin Shields is extraordinary talent, and obviously Bobby as well. So that was your eye. What you were good at was an A&R man, and record companies must have wanted you to join them as their head A&R man.
They did, and especially it got really big by obviously the Oasis thing happened, and Primal Scream happened. Screamadelica came out, sold about 3 million. Loveless came out, did about 1 million. Bandwagon-esque came out, did 1 million, but most of them in America. So then the British music business A&R guys started taking me seriously. And the next band I signed was Oasis. So they actually went after that. U2 were in for that. They were their record company, Mother Records, and Andy McDonald at Godis. But I'd already got a good thing going with Noel. So Noel came with me. And then Oasis pretty immediately did 7 million of Definitely Maybe. And then Morning Glory came out. And it did something like, in the first 3 months, it did something like 10 million or something crazy.
Look, we should get onto that, Alan, because I think that really one of the key changes in your life and changes in music generally was when you fall in love with Acid House and Primal Scream makes Screamadelica and, that whole shift in scene that went on. I mean, we spoke a few weeks ago to Peter from New Order and, they had a similar kind of transition.
You had a sort of epiphany and moved to Manchester and you started putting out those records, which is quite ironic, isn't it? That kind of Tony Wilson at Factory, at the heart of everything, kind of missed it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love Tony, one of my friends. How I moved to Manchester it wasn't to do with music, it's to do with drugs. And basically... Take us through it. Well, I went on up because I was big. I've been mates with Wilson since 84, 85. And he'd invited me up and it was New Order and Happy Mondays. And I was, I was off my nut. I'd been doing these in London, but I got on to Ecstasy in Manchester. Had a great night at the Hacienda. He'd opened up the basement of the Hacienda, and it was like it was an insane party, right? Do you know what I mean? And it was like all the pop stars, but on top of that, all the football players of the time. We won't go into names, right? And there was a lot going on. And I phoned Tony the Monday, and I went, I'm moving to Manchester. And he went, Erasmus, who owned Factory with Tony, has got a flat above our office. And I rented it. And then I moved into Manchester where a ton of, I think, 3 or 4 girls. And I just basically partied for about the next year. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of went for the drugs, guys. It wasn't a particular... It was a good musical move because it opened me up, but I was going for the hedonism, you know.
But were you getting stuff done? I mean, you were clearly getting stuff done as well while you were there. That's what's really impressive.
Yeah, I was kind of getting stuff done, do you know what I mean? I was probably getting more done than I thought, you know what I mean? I was making Screamadelica at the time, you know what I mean? Well, no, it wasn't.
No, Screamadelica was 89, wasn't it? So, or 90, yeah.
Yeah.
Did sort of My Bloody Valentine and Kevin, were they all going, Jesus, man, you're losing it. You're into disco. What are you doing?
Were you trying to get all of them to get an 808 drum machine?
Gary, he was probably saying, great, that old buffoon is up in Manchester. Let's carry on down in London. Right. He found me painful. I mean, I probably was, do you know what I mean?
I suppose the Stone Roses had already released their album, hadn't they? Just before Screamadelica. But was that a big influence on where you wanted to take Bobby?
Mondays and Roses were just getting big in '89. They were just starting to happen. And I was friends, with Manny and Sean and Gary and everybody. Do you know what I mean? And we were all a similar age. I was a tiny wee bit older than them, and we were good friends. And it's just creation becoming something different. What I was saying to you is, in up to about 87, 80, early 88, I was like a kind of Tim Buckley fan. Do you know what I mean? I was like quite a kind of singer-songwriter kind in that zone.
Laurel Canyon.
And then Acid House happened, and then suddenly I was like wanting to have Acid House hits,
Was it you that put Andrew Weatherall then with Bobby?
No, I don't think it was. I mean, I was there when the initial meeting happened. We were at a rave, Gary, me and Bobby, summer of '89, in Brighton. Went over the field at 4 a.m. You remember, you used to head for the field, and if you had music, with me and Bobby and about, 3 or 4 other people. And then, Guy, all your pals were there, the KLF.
Oh, okay, yeah, Alex and all that lot.
Fucking the Grid, all that mob were all there. And we were out of our minds. And I was like, it got to about 9 a.m, and the ecstasy had run out. And I was like, looking in the grass because I was sure that somebody had dropped me. Weatherall walked up and went, "What are you doing?" And I went, "I'm looking for ecstasy in the grass," as I'm on my hands and knees. And this was us meeting, and Bobby was there. I think Bobby was there.
People fought 2 world wars for this.
And Weatherall was like, "Oh, like your fucking band, McGee, Primal Scream will meet Bob." And it but it wasn't me that put that together. I think I have to give it to Andrew Innes. The guy came down to London with the Primal Scream kind of little boffiny guy, and songwriter. And I think Andrew was the one that went, "Let's do something with Weatherall,"
I kind of wanted to jump back before we go onwards with this, because I was really fascinated about how a little label like you managed to get in position of My Bloody Valentine, spending like years and untold stupid kind of 80s pop money on making a record and locking you out the studio.
Is that Loveless, right?
Yeah.
But how did you let that happen?
Well, I don't know if I did let it happen. I think Kevin Shields made it happen. We made the first record, Isn't Anything, for $7,000, sold about 100,000 copies. Good business. So I suppose we naively thought, that's what was going to happen with Loveless. And, that's not what happened with Loveless. Do you know what I mean? After about a year, I was like haranguing them for the record. They kept ramping up the cost of the record. And I think I essentially got blacklisted for going to the studio. There was never a security guard like the film.
Like, I can't imagine that being that situation in a recording studio ever.
Yeah, I was told to, not come to the studio anymore. And it nearly did bankrupt us. Do you know what I mean? It was like, cost us $270,000. Do you know what I mean? It was insane,
Which in those days was...
And I guess we should just have a nod to your partners in the company as well. Who were they?
Well, the main one was a guy called Dick Green, who's a great, great guy. He was my lead guitarist in my little kind of punky band. And he was just a guy that, he was less off his nut than me. So he was the straight guy in the relationship, you know what I mean?
So anyway, let's get on to Screamadelica, because I do think this is such an important album, and loaded especially, you know. When was the first time you heard it? How was it introduced to you?
Well, it was a track, Gary, called I'm Losing More Than I'll Ever Have. Primal Scream, they'd come out. I put a couple of indie singles out in the 80s. I'd signed them to Rob Dickens. It went in about 67 in the charts. Half the band left. Then they made another album, and I put them back on Creation, and they made a New York Doll sounding record. And this is going into Acid House, right? It was so out of time. And it wasn't actually that good. But they had one track on it. It was genius, and it was called I'm Losing More Than I'll Ever Have. They were touring, but when we started that tour, it was like kind of 500 people a night. About a year later, as we were still taking it round, it was like 200 people a night. It was about to die. And we decided to put out I'm Losing More Than I'll Ever Have. And I think because me and Bobby were going to a lot of clubs, and Bobby was actually pretty much like, is this going to work, McGee? And it was only me being me going, it's going to work.
And he looks like a pop star, right? He looks like a rock star.
Yeah, no, Bob's always looked great. So basically we go, let's get a mix done. And Innes goes, let's get Andy Weatherall. So we get this Andy Weatherall mix, and it comes back the first time and there's no Bobby Gillespie on it. And you know what I'm like, put him back in the mix. And they're like, no, don't. Like, it's a damn. So eventually it goes back and forward 2 or 3 times and we get loaded. And I still, and this is just shows you how fucking fluky the whole thing is, I still thought it's an extra track in a 12-inch. And we put it out as the third track in a 12-inch, December 89. And by the time Christmas happens, right, you know, we come back the first week after Christmas and everybody is going, that track loaded, what a track. And I still didn't flip it. And it got to about another 2 weeks until the noise was so big that everybody was going, you have to make this the single. And I did. And then it blew up. Yeah.
And what happened? Did you do a 7-inch version? And then you must have had pluggers who took it to Radio 1. I mean, was it all about Radio 1 in those days still?
No, but it wasn't. That record wasn't. It did get on Radio 1, and it was quite a big radio record. But that's not what broke it. It was the clubs, Gary. That record went in the clubs. By that Christmas, the Acid House clubs had jumped on it in London, and then Manchester jumped on it, and it just became a big deal, you know.
But it was that dance mix thing of, it was quite common on your kind of extended mixes and dance mixes where there's actually not that much Primal Scream on it.
No, we had this big hit and it was fantastic. And then we went to do Come Together. This is true as well, right? And we get the mixes back off of Weatherall, and he sends us back the Jesse Jackson, music is just music mix. And it's fucking great. And I played it to Bob, and Bob was like, I'm not on it. Bob left the band for about a day. So we had Terry Farley doing the other mix, and I phoned Terry Farley up and threatened him and went, you won't fucking paid, pal. Put him on the... Don't not put him on. Because I think he sent it back. I don't think Primal Scream were on the track. And I was like, you put him on the track. And then from that, we had the band version with Terry putting the dance beats in him.
Because there was that kind of dilemma at that time, wasn't there? Because house music obviously was all instrumental pretty much. And then the Happy Mondays made their second album with hardly any Shaun Ryder on it. And, you know, people were a bit confused about what to do with the vocalist.
Well, that's why it was funny when Moving On Up came out. And suddenly it's like, oh, there's a rock and roll band here. Who are these guys?
Moving On Up, since you like the Screamadelica thing. Shannon O'Shea had played me some Jimmy Miller stuff, and she went, Jimmy wants to meet you, right? Do you know what I mean? Blah, 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 right?
Jimmy Miller, who did the Stones?
Yeah. So I roll into a meeting, Gary, and I roll on in, and it's Jimmy Miller, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in a hotel room, and he's pissed out his tits. And I was like, oh, fuck, one of these old rock dudes. I mean, like, I probably was one of these old rock dudes 10 years ago. He goes, I've got this band from fucking Argentina or somewhere, however he was playing. And he played it. And it was, without a great song, can I just say, but it was Exile and Main Street Stones to a T that he played. Right. And I was suddenly like, that could work for somebody. Not thinking it could work for Primal Scream, but I thought that could work for somebody. And then when moving on up, we didn't have Andy to mix that. Weatherall turned it down. I think he called it to Bobby, it's like tribute band Stones or something like that, right? And I went, what about Jimmy Miller? And you know what? They're such rock fans. They were like, they were like, fucking Jimmy Miller, let's do it. And it really worked. So that's how we got Jimmy Miller.
And in a way, what they were doing on that, say, on Screamadelica album especially, was everything you'd ever dreamed about, really, because this was psychedelica meets rock and roll meets acid house. This is everything in your entire history in one album.
Brilliant record. I mean, I don't think I've had as much satisfaction of breaking any other band other than Primal Scream because I grew up with them, do you know what I mean? And it was like, you know, when they got big, it felt really justifiable, you know what I mean? You know.
But that was an absolutely unique point in sort of pop music history, in that there was always a dance scene and there was always a rock scene and then like an indie scene. And this is, you know, the first time they became the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, that was an incredibly unifying moment.
Well, it was a kind of dance indie as well, if you think, you know, because before then it was just Chic and the big sort of, you know.
That's what I mean. Yeah, there was a, you know, disco. But then, you know, but kind of New Order had sort of led the way, really.
Yeah. I guess we need to move on to Oasis, really, don't we? Are you in Manchester? Are you still living in Manchester when you discover Oasis?
Oh no! I want to hear the story from the horse's mouth from you, because there's been
Noel's told us the story
cinematically.
Well, what happened is that I had been having a kind of on-off scenario with this girl called Debbie Turner. I was probably in love with, do you know what I mean? But it was going on and on and on, right? And we weren't on at the time, but she was from Acid House. I was hanging out with her, do you know what I mean, in Manchester, so we were really tight. And she was doing her first ever show in King Tut's. Now, I had no idea that the people she shared the rehearsal room were the Gallaghers. And she decided, because they were moaning that she had a gig and they didn't, they could come up and play King Tut's. So I show up to annoy the girl or kind of say, hey, I'm still here.
Isn't there a train involved?
No.
Oh, is that
version of the truth, right? But I go on up and I walk on into King Tut's Wawa Hut, and it's all a little bit like laid back because I didn't know that Glasgow was a city of culture that year. Basically, the pubs are open for 21 hours and the pub's pissed, you know what I mean? So I walked in and nothing was really moving. And I look over and there's this kid in a Man City blue Adidas tracksuit that looks like George Harrison meets George Best. And I thought, incredible looking guy, must be the drug dealer. Because back in 1983, people that looked like that didn't sing in bands. But the people that served the drugs up, they all looked good looking. That was the collection of the time. So I was like, that will be the drug dealer. And I looked at the baldy guy and I thought, the bonehead, and I thought, I bet you that's the fucking singer. Anyway, these guys were trying to bully their way and intimidate the security into letting them play, right? There's about 12 of them. And they all kind of looked the same, except this one guy, who's Liam Gallagher, looked incredible. Didn't think too much more of it. He came to me, security, because I had two of the other bands, which was Boyfriend and 18 Wheeler. Do you mind if another band jumps on the bill, plays 4 songs? I said, I don't care. Keep the peace. Didn't think anything of it. Was having a really boring conversation with somebody an hour and a half later, and somebody went, that band's went on. I couldn't think of a good reason not to go up. So I went up and they started, and it was Rock and Roll Star, and it was great. And I was like, pretty good. I mean, well, not pretty good. It was good. And I was like, yeah. And then they done Up in the Sky, and I was with my sister, and I went, I think I'm going to sign them. Then they did Bring It On Down, and I went, I'm fucking going to sign them. They only did 4 songs, and Liam goes, our next song's a Beatles song. And I thought, oh, here we go. Because back in 1993, all these indie bands were doing Beatles covers, and they were all shit.
Right.
So I just thought, here we go. You know, it's going to be shit. And of course, it wasn't shit. And I was like, fuck.
What did they do?
What was it? Which one was it?
It was I'm the Walrus.
That's right, yeah, I've seen it.
And you know what? That's a hard song to do well.
Yeah.
So I said to the sound guy, Coyley, who I'd worked with, said, who's the manager? No manager. Like, right, okay. I went, who's the leader? No. Go and get No. And then No trots down about 10 minutes later with a tape and going, do you want a tape? And I went, no. I said, do you want a deal? And he went, who with? And I went, Creation. I think at that point he maybe clocked, oh, that's that guy McGee. You know, we basically chatted for the next 20 minutes about the Pistols and the Beatles. And I said, I'll get you down to London. But I did go home that night. Well, not home. I was in a hotel that night. I did go back to the hotel thinking, I wonder if they're only good because I'm pissed. Do you know what I mean? You know? And I think there was other things involved as well. So I thought, maybe. And then I got them down and, you know, it was an incredible meeting, you know, 4 days later, one of the best meetings I'd ever had. And at that point, I was just, I'm going to sign them. Do you know what I mean? And
why was the meeting so good? Is it because Liam was such a born rock star?
No.
Or was it just Noel, wasn't it?
I tell you what happened, Gary. It's because I was such a rock fanatic at the time. My office was called The Bunker. And walking down to my office in Hackney, above a sweatshop, it was pictures of Lowell George.
Yes.
George Harrison. Do you know what I mean? It was like all the fucking people that I love, right?
Who would have thought Lowell George? Seriously. But I have deep respect for the man.
And Noel comes down and I went, what are you into? And he goes, Lowell George, Paul Simonon. There was no way Noel was not walking out of that office without a fucking record deal. And I was like, it's a fucking blood, brother. And that was it. We'll sign you. And that was that. We totally shook it that day. And it was done that we were going to sign them.
There's a question I want to ask about that band in that, you know, you said you had a chat with Noel about the Beatles and the Sex Pistols. These were kids, right? So this, in my memory, this was the first time when a band was looking back to be influenced. Because, you know, growing up, being the same age as you, it was always the bands that were happening in front of us that influenced us. There seemed to be a shift at that point, didn't there, to sort of archives.
Oasis was a strange one. It's like, only because I'm kind of OCD about what I'm into. If you had logically looked about signing that band, you would never have done it. Do you know what I mean? Like Manchester was 2 years previous.
Yeah.
The music business was totally not about that. And I came along at that point and just went, this is great. I'll sign it. Do you know what I mean? Because I like it. But I don't think I thought it's going to sell 60 million records. I don't think I thought that at all. Do you know what I mean?
One would wonder if you saw Nebworth when you saw them at King Tut's.
Not at all. I probably thought, I get it out before the Stone Roses, the second album, I might get a gold record a couple of times. Do you know what I mean?
So I'm just thinking of what's happening at the time, because this thing of just straight ahead rock and roll wasn't really that. I mean, what was happening at that time? You had Massive Attack, you had Suede, I guess.
Yeah.
But there wasn't really a focal point, was there? Musically.
Yeah. No, it was strange. It was because I'd been up in Manchester and, you know, I was really influenced by that Mondays. I loved Manchester. I loved that. And that's what Oasis really were. That's what people miss.
But I think there must be, I mean, listen, it goes without saying that Liam had stardom and charisma in spades, and along with Noel's sort of triumphant anthemic songs, this was, you know, a brotherhood made in hell. You know? But there must have been a cultural anticipation for this band, for it to blow so big so soon. There must have been. And when you look at Nebworth and you look at that crowd, and let's face it, this is white working class.
Yeah.
What was it at that point that was just waiting for lads to walk on stage who looked exactly like them, who swore and behaved exactly like they would like to behave? It was just waiting to be born, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a moment. It was an absolute moment. I remember when I played it to, what's his name? The guy that became the head of Sony Music, Blair something or other, right? And this is before Oasis had put a record out.
Before Tony Blair.
Blair, they had a first option on anything I signed, right? You know, with the publishing. And I had to play them it. And Blair was like, Alan, Manchester is over. And you know what I'm like? I'm going, it's the greatest rock and roll band in the world, which I no doubt fucking believed, do you know what I mean? But it took so long for Sony Publishing to sign that. Do you know what I mean? It took them 9 months. Do you know what I mean?
Wow. And the interesting thing is, because where this is going with Britpop, is that Blur are already around. They've already been around for a while, putting out records, and they've already had a hit or two.
No, right? Blur were big. When we put out Definitely Maybe, Blur had just sold 2 million Part Life records. They were a really big band. They'd had the first album, they'd had that big hit, She's So High.
The Sid Barrett one, yeah.
Second album had been critically acclaimed, but hadn't sold.
That's right.
And they were right on the verge of kind of, and they came out with Park Life and it blew up, you know what I mean?
Look, I love Blur in their own right, and and Damon's a great artist and everything. But when you think back now, there's no comparison between the two. I mean, they're making absolutely different music. How anyone could put them in the same world is extraordinary. And without any shadow of a doubt, Liam was and Noel were just the bigger stars, And
but you know what, Gary? The night that I signed Oasis, I met them, right, in King Tut's Wawa Hut, 31st of May, 1993. I'm going to tell you something that's totally factually true. Liam was very quiet. He wasn't dominating it. He looked amazing, but he stood. What was more impressive that night was the sound of the band and Noel's guitar playing. That's kind of why I did it.
Yeah, you're right, because Liam stood very still on stage, didn't he? And almost that was probably part of his shyness in a way, not knowing what to do with himself, where, someone like Bobby was doing the whole Jagger thing.
Yeah, Liam now stands still, but he dominates the stage. It wasn't like that. He was standing still, just singing. He wasn't throwing it out there. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, the sound of the band was real. They could really play. By that point, they were really rehearsed, and do you know what I mean? It was good.
So what was the timeline there? How fast did it move with you? The album happened very quickly.
Well, I found them. Took about 3 or 4 months to sign them. There was lack of money with us. Eventually, we put it through a Sony company. I had English rights. I owned the whole of the England thing. And then I was paid 4 points for an override for all the other records outside England. So it was a good deal for me personally. That's the way we done it. Do you know what I mean? And, because I didn't have the 40 grand to sign them. So I had to go and get some money. Do you know what I mean? And that took 4 months. And by that point, I had got America interested. So we had a worldwide kind of release idea,
Because you had a relationship with Seymour Stein, didn't you?
I love it.
So I wondered if he was a sort of like mind, I guess.
That's Sire Records, isn't it? Talking Heads.
Maverick, sort of Sire Records, yeah. Signed the Ramones and Blondie. And
he signed off me Primal Scream, Ride, My Bloody Valentine. He had a real great run with me. But I think when I wanted to do a label deal, because we were going bankrupt at the time, I don't think he thought there was much more juice in it. Do you know what I mean? So, he didn't want to give us whatever we were looking for, which probably wasn't that much. And Sony came in and then done this deal, and it kind of all worked out.
As Oasis, I mean, it was absolutely huge. Did people like Kevin and Bobby, did they feel like a bit let down? Were they sort of like, oh, you now you've got a new back kid in town? And was there any of that going on with your other acts?
Look, yeah, Bobby, I think, really felt it, but we've never really talked about it. Get him on your show and ask him. Do you know what I mean?
We'd love him on the show. By the way, when you see him on Saturday, please tell him to get in touch.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell him. But he probably really felt it. Kevin was gone by that point. But the thing is, you've got to keep in context. You two.
Oh, yeah. Kevin was starting his album that would take 20 years, right?
It was. But think on this, guys. It's like Oasis were like, they were 20 times bigger than any of these other bands. Literally 20 times bigger. Yeah. You couldn't be in a bad mood about it, no matter who you were. That's just a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was because when we had Noel on, which is brilliant, and I told him how I'd gone to Main Road to because there was that lovely thing which he confirmed for me, that he'd gone to see Floyd at Main Road, and that was when all the acid house generation got into Floyd, which is, well, I'd seen it. And I remember that when they played Earl's Court, and he said, mate, think we're here, man. Pink Floyd was here only a year ago or something. And so I went to see him with David Gilmour at Earl's Court. And it was incredible how they were tracking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. You know what I mean?
I guess, when you're on a lot of drugs and you're doing a lot of drugs, you need to hit rock bottom before you decide you're going to, stop. But you're on a lot of drugs, and then you have this massive hit band come on, and it's all working for you. But how did you keep the balance?
At what point was Oasis already up and running? Had that already happened? When
we got Owen in, I went into rehab as we were struggling with the mixes. Noel and Marcus were bringing me Owen Morris mixes into rehab. Saying, McGee, listen to this. I was like, yeah, it's great. You know, it was kind of mad. The Oasis thing's not seat of the pants because it's right. When it's right, it's really right. But there was a lot of it that it was haphazard, you know.
You had a crash in America, didn't you?
Yeah. And then I went off, Gary, for about 9 months, and then came back, and then I've managed to stay, you know, off drugs since then, you know.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well done. Well, actually, it does, because you did say earlier, I'm just wondering how when you saw Oasis said, I want to give him a deal, and waking up the next day and thinking, oh shit, was that because I was pissed and I was high or whatever? Has that happened? Are there bands that you've woken up and gone, oh no?
Yeah, it is. I remember them.
Don't expect you to say who it is, because obviously that would be crushing for them.
I had an absolute bender one night, and I signed this. It was almost a Depeche Mode tribute band.
What were they called?
Counterfeit. Luckily, nobody remembers it, right? And I put out this 12-inch, 1989, coming off the back of like a really good weekend. You know, I'll sign you and I'll put it out, and then literally 6 weeks later, you know, okay, what have I done? There was a few like that. You know?
Do you think people were at parties going, no, give it another couple of hours, then we'll approach you?
Send in the dealer. You know, I mean, famously, you didn't like the establishment of the record company, and, you know, you were staunch indie label owner, manager. Suddenly you're in number 10 Downing Street.
Yeah.
I do love that. That was quite an extraordinary moment, wasn't it, in cultural history? You and Noel and Tony Blair.
Gary, I was like, it's a long story, but it's like...
Go on then.
Go on then. Go on. That's what we're here for, mate.
So I'm at Nebworth, and I've been in the Labour Party for 2 years, right? Because I've got clean now, right? And I'm at Nebworth 2 years later, right? It's the second night, and there's these wee guys. I tell you who one of them is, and you'll go, no way, right? A guy called Derek and a guy called somebody else, right? And Derek is Derek Draper, who has just come out of the coma. You know, the TV presenter's husband?
Yes, of course.
So that's who Derek was. He was actually Peter Mandelson's or Gordon Brown's PR guy. So anyway, Derek comes up to me and goes, are you Alan McGee of the Labour Party? And I went, I am. And then I went, because it sort of worked out, I think he's in the Labour Party, this guy that's just done Nebworth with this big fucking band. And I said, yeah, I am. And he went, and I said, and you haven't given me my wee Labour card. If you take my £15, but you never gave me my card. So they were like, right. And that was like Sunday. And then I think the Monday, I got a phone call, and it was like, Margaret McDonough, the General Secretary of the Labour Party for Alan McGee, on the tannoy, on the office thing. So I picked the phone up, and she goes, oh, can I come round and see you? So she brings me my Labour card, and then she goes, well, we want to ask you a direct question. Will you help us? And I'm like, well, what capacity? And she goes, just get involved and help us do it. I'm like, okay, I will. And they went, okay, what do you want me to start? I went, can Oasis play the youth party comes in Blackpool? I went, okay, when is it? And they go, Saturday night. And I was like, Saturday night? This Saturday night? Or 2 Saturday nights, maybe it's 2 Saturday nights. Anyway, I phoned Noel, and Noel was like, knackered and blah, blah, blah. Just give them a platinum disc, McGee. I went, all right, okay. A platinum disc, and there's like, Creation Records and Oasis give Tony Blair and the Labour Party platinum record, right? And I bowl up to youth conference, meet Tony Blair, and give him this fucking disc, right? And that was the beginning of them trying to bring me in. And then I got to know them. It was bizarre. I mean, it was totally bizarre. I mean, it was like Peter Mandelson, who I kind of like, to be honest. But
this is before they got voted in 97, right?
Anyway, it ran on, and do you know what I mean? I gave them some money, and it was all that stuff. And not for wanting anything, you know, because I actually believed in it. And eventually, they got in, which was brilliant. I went to Royal Festival Hall. It was fucking great. I was put in charge, Gary, you'll love this one. I was put in charge of Mick Hucknall. They said, will you look after him?
Nice. Before that vote in 97, I was doing the same sort of thing. I was going up and doing a few of the, the conferences I mean, we were all trying to help. We'd all been sick of the government that we'd had for so long.
I can vouch for this, Gary. I remember you going out and knocking on doors, canvassing.
Yeah, you are.
Man. So then they said, do you want to come to 10 Downing Street? I never thought Noel would come. Right, you know what I mean? You know, I had to ask him. They said, oh, do you bring Noel? And, you know, and I was like, yeah, I'll ask him. And I said, do you want to come? And then he came back and went, yeah, I'm going to come. And I was like, I was kind of gobsmacked he wanted to come, but I was like, all right, come. And then he goes, I'll pick you up in the Rolls Royce. And then we trotted off with my wife and Meg, his missus, and we went and done it. I've got to be honest, I went because I'm Scottish. I went because I thought, I'm never going to be asked back to this ever again. So I may as well see it. Yeah. And I did, and I've never been asked back. You know what I mean?
There's that extraordinary sort of overheard thing, isn't there, when Noel says something to Blair about how'd you stay up all night, and he says probably not the same way you do. And this sort of like tacit admission, it's like, so that's like the Prime Minister saying, well, it's cool that you do drugs. I mean, it's an extraordinary moment. But the other thing that's amazing is the fact that because so much of that whole Britpop Oasis phenomenon is seen as part of this Cool Britannia, New Labour Britain, but it actually mainly happened under John Major's Tories. Yeah. That's the funny thing.
Do you know what really was a good thing of me getting involved with Labour, though, was people don't really know this, but I managed to get legislation through. It was called New Deal for Musicians.
Yeah.
And you could be a musician for 4 years.
Yeah.
And as long as you could prove you really were a musician, they would pay you your money, but not going to get a job by being a musician. That got put through because I kind of got in with Labour. So I suppose...
do we know if any bands came out of that?
I think a few bands. I think Libertines. did that deal.
But it's funny because what we all used to do was you'd be on the dole and you just had to come up with the most obscure job that you could do so that you couldn't get one. I remember Youth said he was a shepherd is how he used to get his dole.
But he probably was. Alan, you ended up selling Creation to Sony, right?
Yeah.
Why did that happen, and how did your bands react to that?
We were going bankrupt in...
How could you go bankrupt with Oasis, as big as they were?
Oasis, because we went bankrupt because we had no seed money. Do you know what I mean? So there was never any... We didn't start with anything. It was literally a punk label that got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Was it literally just go and see the manager at the local bank? Is that how you made things happen?
It was a bit worse than that, dude. It was more like we'd always owe pressing plants $250,000. And, do you know what I mean? And that went on for 6 years. Do you know what I mean? We never paid 1 month, and then, do you know what I mean? So we always owed 2 or 3 months. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of owing 90 days, we owed in 120 days. It was like, so the debt was always humongous. And I think we eventually sold to Sony in 92 for like not a lot of money, 49%. At that point, we got bankrupt, but they gave me $2.5 million for 49%. So that was good. We got into business with them, and then Oasis happened, and they could buy me out at a certain point. So I had to fight them off. And then we changed the deal to that they put money down against eventually buying me out. Do you know what I mean? So they paid me a whole ton of money after Oasis. And it ended up, I did great out of it. But, do you know what I mean? I wasn't Clive Calder. It wasn't, in some ways, it didn't reflect the massive band that I'd brought them. Do you know what I mean? But it was still great. You know what I mean? It was still great.
But I can imagine Noel and Liam not being so concerned. But I suppose the guy that has been part of this story right from the beginning is Bobby Gillespie. Yeah. And suddenly Bobby's no longer in your indie label. He's now signed to Sony, and you've gone. How was it for him?
I don't think it was that great, but it was equally, it hasn't stopped him. Do you know what I mean? You know, it was fractious for a while. You're right. Do you know what I mean? You know, the truth is, Gary, I'm not really a business person, and my parents weren't business people. It was a punk label that maybe because I could pick good bands, it became this huge thing. Nobody had ever told me how to deal with this. At one point in the late 90s, Gary, we were doing 40 million a year turnover every year. Do you know what I mean? And that's the mid-90s. I don't know what that would mean now, but that was the mid-90s. And I was this guy with 1 O-level and no business sense, really, blagging it. And at a certain point, I think I just wanted out. I think it got too big. Do you know what I mean? Not a great answer, but that is the truth.
No. You deserve the rewards, I guess.
It's interesting as if you were that young man now, what would you do?
Not sell. I mean, because now we're in I mean, God, I mean, we're talking to one of Britain's really great songwriters, Gary Kemp. I mean, it's like, look, I'm sure you've not done the deal yet, Gary, but the deal's on the table now as people buy your songs, my God. Do you know what I mean? That's a lot of money. And that's, we're in a different place again with the music business. I know little bands that if I said their name, I won't say it, I would struggle to sing one of their hits. They just got paid $5 million by Merck. Do you know what I mean? So I know what people get paid, and it's in a different place. So to answer that question, I wouldn't have sold, but different time, man, you know.
You know, we'd love to go through everything else, you know, Death Disco and everything. We all have our moments that is just like where we create something out of the blue, and it's and it lives with us forever in legend. And you've done that a few times, Alan.
Thank you.
But what is happening now? You just got Creation back together again.
Yeah, but I've got a little version of that. It's like the music business. You guys know me and an iPhone versus the world. Do you know what I mean? And I'm like, Sunday night I was negotiating a Ferrari ad, and then blah blah blah. Do you know what I mean?
Because you still have the publishing for quite a lot of the bands, right?
I've got publishing in Primal Scream. But most of it's reverted. I had Knowles publishing. I had because I'd introduced them to Sony. I had that up to 2011. Do you know what I mean? That was beautiful. But the rights revert, don't they? Do you know what I mean? You know. But yeah, it's good. Look, I'm happy. I mean, I managed the Mondays, Sean Ryder, and a load of other people.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
It's okay, man. You know what I mean? I'm old now. It's like you can't always be the trailblazer. You know what I mean?
And what's happening? What do you think's happening out there? Is there new kids on the block that you don't get anymore? Or
I think there's some great new bands. I think the fans want rock and roll. I just don't know if the media or the DSPs want rock and roll. Do you know what I mean? But there is some great bands. Do you know what I mean? You know, I know them. Do you know what I mean? I manage one of them. Do you know what I mean? You know, so it's what it is. You know?
Thanks for coming on.
That's such short notice. That's great.
But I'd love to meet up. We'd love to meet up and have a cup of tea.
I want to meet you. And I've actually listened to every one of your pods. That's great.
Thank you, man.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get you details. All the best.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks,
That
Alan.
gets you into the intro at some point, by the way, that quote. Brilliant. The irrepressible Alan McGee.
That was wonderful, wasn't it? I mean, I think he's our first manager, but he's kind of a rock star manager, isn't he?
He's the last of that line of Mavericks, isn't he? Which just kind of goes from like Andrew Lou Goldham, Kit Lambert, Chris Stamp through. Dare I say, I would put Steve Dagger on that.
Yes, Spandau manager, and also we never mentioned Malcolm McLaren, who must have been
Malcolm, of course, yes,
a massive influence on what he did. But what a time! What a time that was, and to be at the centre of that storm.
Yeah, I think it's more a matter of just being that person who doesn't freak out. It's like Wile E. Coyote, isn't it? He runs off the cliff, and as long as he doesn't look down.
So, listen, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with someone else beautiful and interesting and full of anecdotes about rock. Until then.
Indeed. And I think there was a first this week as the word didn't come up.
The word beginning with P?
Yes.
We won't mention it then.
We won't.
And it's good night from me.
And it's good night from me.